My dad texted, "We're cutting you off. Don't ever contact us again." My sister liked it. I wrote back, "I'll take my name off every loan tomorrow." By midnight, the family group chat was blowing up with all caps yelling. Can you imagine getting a text message that tells you your own family has severed all ties, followed by your sister liking that message? For me, that wasn't just a text, it was the final, devastating blow that forced me to finally choose myself, no matter how much it shattered everything around me. I was just trying to get through my lunch break at work, skimming emails, when my phone buzzed. Dad's name popped up, and for half a second, I actually thought he might be checking in. Maybe asking how last week's presentation went, or if I'd heard back about that promotion. Something normal, something that acknowledged I was more than just a convenient signature on paperwork. But then the message loaded. I read it twice. "We've chosen to sever all contact. Stay away from us forever." No preamble, no explanation, just this cold, clinical declaration that I was officially excommunicated from the family I'd spent 29 years bending over backward to support. My phone buzzed again before the first blow even registered. Madison. My younger sister. The golden child, the one who never met a family drama she couldn't make worse, had actually taken the time to react with a thumbs-up emoji. A thumbs up to our father telling me to disappear. I just sat there in the break room, my half-eaten sandwich forgotten, staring at that little blue thumb. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and someone's leftovers were stinking up the microwave. Everything felt so surreal, like I'd slipped into some alternate dimension where my family could just discard me via text, and my own sister would celebrate it. My hands were shaking when I typed out my response. I didn't let myself overthink it. No drafting and redrafting like I usually did when communicating with them. I just wrote what came to mind and hit send. "I'll remove my name from every loan tomorrow." Then I turned off my phone, finished my lunch, and went back to work. I had a client meeting at 2, and I wasn't about to let my family's latest dysfunction ruin my professional life the way they'd ruined pretty much everything else. The thing is, I'd always been the responsible one. While Madison was partying through college on mom and dad's dime, racking up credit card debt and changing majors every semester, I was working 2 jobs to pay my own tuition. When mom wanted to refinance the house for a European vacation, I was the one who co-signed because my credit score was immaculate and theirs was in the toilet. When dad decided to lease a truck he couldn't afford, guess who guaranteed that loan? When Madison needed a car after totaling her 3rd one, who signed as the primary borrower because her credit was so trashed no dealership would touch her? Me. Always me. The dependable daughter, the one who showed up, signed the papers, wired the money, and asked for nothing in return, except maybe a little acknowledgement, a little respect. I never got it. Instead, I got years of backhanded comments about my weight, my career choices, my decision to stay single rather than settle for whatever loser they thought was good enough. I was excluded from family photos because Madison said I'd ruin the aesthetic with my outfit choices. I got lectured about being selfish when I couldn't drop everything to help them move furniture, or dog sit, or drive 3 hours to some cousin's baby shower. But I kept showing up. I kept signing. I kept being the safety net. Because that's what family does, right? You support each other. You help when times are tough. Apparently, that philosophy only flowed one direction. I turned my phone back on during my drive home from work, and it immediately started vibrating like it was having a seizure. Texts, missed calls, voicemails. The family group chat, which I'd been added to years ago but was rarely active and unless someone needed something from me, had exploded. I waited until I was parked in my apartment complex before I opened it. "Madison, are you serious right now?" "Mom, Charlotte, how could you threaten us like this?" "Dad, this is why we made the decision we did." "You're vindictive and selfish." "Madison, you're literally trying to destroy us." "Mom, please reconsider. Let's talk about this like adults." "Madison, I need my car." "Charlotte, I have a job." That last one almost made me laugh. Madison had worked at the same boutique for 6 months and had already called out sick more times than she'd worked full shifts. "But sure, tell me about how essential your car is." The messages kept coming, each one more frantic than the last. Uncle Tim had apparently been added to the chat and was weighing in with his usual wisdom about how family needs to forgive and forget. Aunt Laura was sending prayer hand emojis. Cousin Derek, who I hadn't spoken to in 5 years, suddenly had opinions about my character. I scrolled through it all with a strange sense of detachment. These people had just told me to stay away forever. Dad had actually typed those words. And now, less than hours later, they were melting down because I'd agreed to respect their wishes. The only thing I was taking with me was the financial anchor they'd tied around my neck. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I opened my banking app and started documenting everything. The house refinance was in my name and Dad's, with me listed as the primary borrower because his debt-to-income ratio was too high to qualify solo. The truck lease had my signature as the guarantor. Madison's car loan was entirely under my name, my social security number, because she defaulted on so many obligations that no lender would approve her directly. There was also the personal loan Mom had begged me to take out 2 years ago when she wanted to renovate the kitchen. $20,000 at a decent interest rate because of my credit, with monthly payments of $380 automatically deducted from my account. She was supposed to reimburse me. She'd made exactly 3 payments before the excuses started. I'd been carrying all of it, every single month, like it was my responsibility, making sure nothing went into collections, protecting the credit I'd worked so hard to build. Even as my own savings stagnated and my dream of buying a place of my own kept getting pushed further away. Tomorrow, I'd start making calls. I barely slept. But when my alarm went off at 6:30, I was already awake. I made coffee, got dressed in my best business casual, and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop, my phone, and a legal pad covered in notes. The house refinance was first. I called the loan servicer at exactly 9 a.m. when they opened. The representative who answered sounded bored until I explained what I needed to do. I'm listed as a co-borrower on a mortgage, and I need to remove myself from the loan. Ma'am, you can't just remove yourself from a mortgage. The loan would need to be refinanced with the remaining borrower qualifying on their own, or the property would need to be sold. Perfect, I said, a grim satisfaction settling over me. What are my options for initiating that process? There was a pause. Is the other borrower agreeable to this? That's not my concern. I'm terminating my financial obligation to this loan. If the other party wants to keep the house, he'll need to refinance in his own name. If he can't qualify, the house will need to be sold. I'd like to start whatever paperwork is necessary to make that happen. The representative transferred me to a supervisor, who transferred me to their legal department. By the time I hung up, I had a clear understanding of the process. I could demand removal from the loan, which would trigger a refinance requirement. If Dad couldn't qualify, and he definitely couldn't, the house would go into a forced sale situation. I felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, just the grim determination of someone who finally decided to stop setting herself on fire to keep other people warm. The truck lease was next. That one was easier. I called the dealership, explained I was a guarantor on a lease I no longer wished to guarantee, and asked about their policies for guarantor removal. The finance manager wasn't happy, but he explained that if the primary lessee couldn't secure an alternative guarantor or refinance the lease, the vehicle would be subject to repossession. You'll want to give written notice, he said, his tone clipped. Certified mail. We'll need to reassess the lessee's qualifications without a guarantor, and if he doesn't meet our requirements, we'll begin the recovery process. How long does that typically take? I asked. 30 to 60 days after we receive your notice. I drafted the letter before lunch. Madison's car was the one I'd been dreading. The loan was entirely in my name. Legally, it was my car. She was just driving it because I'd been trying to help her get back on her feet after her last disaster. The insurance was under my policy. The registration was in my name. I could just take it back. The thought sat with me while I ate a salad at my desk, scrolling through the increasingly unhinged messages in the family group chat. Mom was now claiming I was having some kind of breakdown and needed therapy. Dad was threatening to sue me for financial abuse, which would have been funny if it weren't so perfectly on brand. Madison had sent about 40 messages ranging from angry to pleading to angry again, with several voice memos thrown in that I didn't bother listening to. Uncle Tim had apparently appointed himself the family mediator and was trying to organize some kind of intervention conference call. Aunt Laura was still sending prayers, but had also started subtly implying I was being controlled by Satan. The thing was, I didn't feel out of control. For the first time in years, I felt like I was thinking clearly. I called a friend from college who'd gone to law school and now practiced family law in a different state. We'd stayed close, mostly through occasional text messages and annual birthday calls, but she'd always been someone I could trust. Lauren, I started, hypothetically, if someone co-signed on a bunch of loans for family members and now wanted out, what would be the cleanest way to handle it? She was quiet for a second. Charlotte, is this about your family? Hypothetically, right? I pressed. Hypothetically, if someone had their name on loans as a guarantor or co-borrower, they'd have legal options depending on the specific loan types. Mortgages are trickier and usually require refinancing or sale. Car loans and leases can often be resolved by demanding removal and forcing the primary borrower to requalify. Personal loans depend on the terms, but if you're the primary borrower and someone else benefited, you could potentially sue for repayment, though that's messy and expensive. What if the car loan is entirely in the hypothetical person's name and they just let a family member use the vehicle? Lauren laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Then, hypothetically, that person owns the car and can repossess it whenever they want. It's their property. What did your family do to you? She asked, her voice serious. I told her. Not everything, but enough. The years of being taken for granted, the financial burden I'd been carrying, the constant criticism and exclusion, the text from Dad and Madison's thumbs up. When I finished, Lauren was quiet for a long moment. Take the car, she finally said. Take it today. Don't tell them you're coming. Just go get your property back before they can hide it or disable it or do something stupid. And Charlotte, document everything. Every loan, every payment you've made, every text message. If they try to take legal action against you, you'll need proof that you've been more than fair. I left work early, claiming a family emergency. It wasn't even a lie. Madison still lived with our parents in the house I was co-signed on, driving the car I owned, working her part-time job when she felt like it, and spending her money on whatever whims struck her fancy. I knew her schedule. She'd be at work until 6, and Mom and Dad both had jobs that kept them out until at least 5:30. I had a spare key to the house and a spare key to the car. I'd kept them for emergencies, never imagining I'd be using them like this. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as always when I pulled up. Neat lawns, identical suburban houses, American flags on a few porches. I had grown up 3 blocks away in the smaller house my parents had sold before they upgraded to this one, the one they'd needed me to co-sign for because their credit was wrecked from years of living beyond their means. Madison's car, my car, was parked in the driveway, gleaming white in the afternoon sun. I'd made every payment for 3 years. I'd paid for the insurance, the registration, the maintenance. I'd eaten the cost when she'd gotten a speeding ticket and didn't bother to pay it until it went to collections, tanking the insurance premium. I parked on the street, walked up to the car with my key and unlocked it. The interior was a disaster, as expected. Fast food wrappers on the floor, makeup scattered across the passenger seat, someone's jacket crumpled in the back. It smelled like artificial cherry air freshener and stale French fries. I started the engine and drove away. It felt surreal, like I was stealing something, even though it legally belonged to me. I kept expecting someone to run out of the house and yell at me to stop, or for the police to pull me over. But the neighborhood stayed quiet, and I made it back to my apartment complex without incident. I parked the car in my assigned spot, locked it, and went inside. Then I sent a single message to the family group chat. I've recovered my vehicle. Madison can arrange alternative transportation. I didn't wait for the responses. I silenced the chat and got ready for my evening workout class. The fallout was nuclear. By the time I got back from the gym, sweaty and endorphin-buzzed and feeling more like myself than I had in months, my phone had practically melted from the volume of incoming messages and calls. The family chat had over 200 new messages. I'd been removed and re-added 3 times, apparently as some kind of punishment, before they realized they needed me in there to yell at me. Mom had left voicemails crying about how cruel I was being. Dad had sent a text threatening to call the police and report the car stolen, which would have been hilarious if he'd actually tried it. Madison had posted something on Facebook about narcissistic family members and betrayal, tagging me in it until I untagged myself and changed my privacy settings. The extended family had also escalated their involvement. Cousins I barely knew were sending me private messages, calling me selfish and heartless. Uncle Tim had attempted a group video call that I declined. Aunt Laura had apparently started a prayer chain at her church specifically about my soul. The only person who hadn't contacted me was my grandmother, Mom's mother, who lived in a retirement community in Arizona and generally stayed out of the drama. She'd always been kind to me in a distant, polite way, sending birthday cards with checks for $50 and asking generic questions about my life during the holidays. Around 9 p.m., my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another flying monkey from the family tree, but something made me pick up. "Charlotte?" The voice was elderly, but firm. It was Grandma Ruth. "Hi, Grandma. Your mother called me this afternoon, extremely upset. She said you've stolen your sister's car and are trying to force them out of their home." I told her that didn't sound like something you'd do without a good reason. So, I thought I'd hear your side before I form an opinion. I almost cried. In a day full of people assuming the worst about me, having someone actually ask for my perspective felt like a lifeline. I explained everything: the loans, the years of being the financial safety net, the constant criticism, the exclusion from family events, the text from Dad, Madison's reaction, the decision to finally extract myself from obligations I should never have taken on in the first place. Grandma Ruth listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a few seconds. "Your grandfather and I loaned your mother money once, when she and your father were young and struggling. $5,000, which was a lot back then. We agreed they'd pay it back when they could. They never did. Not $1. When we brought it up years later, your mother said she didn't remember it as a loan, that she thought it was a gift. She seemed genuinely confused that we expected repayment." She sighed, and I could hear her shifting in her chair, the phone rustling against fabric. Some people go through life assuming the world owes them support without reciprocation. Your mother is one of those people. She raised Madison to be the same way. "I'm sorry they've treated you like an ATM instead of a daughter. You're doing the right thing by protecting yourself, even if they can't see it." We talked for another 20 minutes. She told me stories about my grandfather, who'd passed when I was 12, and his insistence on financial independence and integrity. She asked about my job, my apartment, my life outside of the family chaos. She listened like my answers mattered. Before we hung up, she said, "I'm updating my will next week. I've been planning to split my estate between your mother and her brother, but I think I'll make some adjustments. You deserve to benefit from family support, even if it comes after I'm gone." I tried to argue, but she shut me down gently. "Charlotte, let an old woman do what she wants with her own money. It'll give me peace." After that call, the family's hysteria felt more manageable, like I had at least one person in my corner who understood. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in boundary enforcement. I blocked Madison's number after she sent me a string of messages that crossed from angry into genuinely unhinged. Mom got filtered, so her calls went straight to voicemail, though I did listen to them occasionally, morbidly curious about the escalating manipulation tactics. Dad tried to have his lawyer send me a threatening letter, but since I hadn't actually done anything illegal, it was mostly bluster. The house refinance process moved forward. Dad applied to refinance the mortgage in his name alone and was, unsurprisingly, denied. The loan servicer began proceedings for a forced sale. I contacted a real estate attorney to make sure my interests were protected and that I'd receive my portion of any equity once the house sold. The truck lease was easier. The dealership sent Dad a letter demanding he either provide a new guarantor or return the vehicle. He managed to find somebody from work who agreed to co-sign, probably without fully understanding what he was getting into. So, at least that problem resolved itself without the truck being repossessed. Madison's transportation situation became a whole saga on social media. She posted daily about the injustice of having her car stolen by her terrible sister, conveniently leaving out the part where it had never been her car to begin with. She set up a GoFundMe to raise money for a new vehicle, which raised about $300 before people apparently got tired of her story. Eventually, Mom and Dad bought her some ancient Honda Civic from Craigslist, which she immediately complained about online because it wasn't new and didn't have the features she wanted. I watched all of this from a distance, my social media accounts locked down tight, feeling nothing but a vague sense of relief that I wasn't part of the circus anymore. Work became my sanctuary. I threw myself into projects, volunteered for extra responsibilities, stayed late to help colleagues who were swamped. My boss noticed and mentioned it during a one-on-one meeting. "You've really stepped up lately, Charlotte. The client presentation last week was exceptional, and I've heard great things about how you're mentoring the new hires." "Thanks," I said, a genuine smile forming. "I've just had some extra energy to redirect recently." She smiled knowingly. Sometimes cutting dead weight from our personal lives frees us up to thrive professionally. Keep it up. We're talking about promotions in the next few months, and your name is definitely on the list. I left that meeting feeling lighter than I had in years. 3 months later, I got the promotion. A title bump to senior account manager and a 15% raise. The extra money went straight into my savings account, building towards something that was actually mine. The house sold after 3 months on the market. It was a decent property in a good school district, so it moved relatively quickly despite the forced sale circumstances. After the mortgage was paid off and the realtor's commission taken out, there was about $40,000 in equity. My attorney made sure I received my portion, which came to $20,000 once everything was divided appropriately. Since I'd been making the majority of the mortgage payments for years while Dad contributed minimally, my lawyer had documented everything to justify the 50-50 split of the remaining equity. Dad sent me a text calling me a vulture for taking their money. I didn't respond, just forwarded the message to my attorney in case we needed it later. What surprised me most during those months wasn't the anger from my family. I'd expected that. What caught me off guard were the people who crawled out of the woodwork to share their own stories. My dental hygienist, during a routine cleaning, mentioned she'd overheard me on the phone in the waiting room weeks earlier and had been thinking about her own situation with her brother ever since. A guy from my gym, someone I'd exchanged maybe 10 words with total, approached me one day and said his girlfriend had been supporting her entire family for years, and it was destroying their relationship. People saw what I was doing and recognized their own trap situations reflected back at them. One woman from my book club, Patricia, invited me to coffee specifically to talk about it. She was in her late 40s, well-dressed, successful by any external measure. We'd never been particularly close, just friendly acquaintances who showed up to discuss the same novels once a month. "My son is 32, she told me, stirring sugar into her cappuccino. "He's lived with me for 8 years, rent-free. He works sporadically, spends his money on gaming equipment and eating out. And every time I suggest he contribute to household expenses or start looking for his own place, he tells me I'm being unsupportive, that real mothers don't charge their children rent." She looked exhausted just talking about it. Last week, he asked me to co-sign on a car loan because his credit is non-existent. Something in me just broke. "I thought about you, about what you did, and I told him no. Just no. No explanation, no justification." He hasn't spoken to me since. He's living in my house, eating my food, using my utilities, and giving me this silent treatment like I'm the one being unreasonable. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I'm giving him 60 days notice to move out." I looked up the tenant laws, and even though he doesn't pay rent, I have to formally evict him. Can you imagine having to legally evict your own child because he refuses to be an adult? We sat there for a while. Two women who'd spent years being taken advantage of by family members who viewed love as a transaction that only went one way. "Does it get easier?" she asked. "The guilt?" I thought about it. The guilt gets quieter. It doesn't disappear completely because we were raised to believe that saying no to family makes us bad people, but it becomes background noise instead of a screaming alarm. You start to realize that real love doesn't require you to destroy yourself. She nodded slowly, then raised her coffee cup to being bad daughters and worse mothers, apparently. I clinked my cup against hers. To having boundaries. The personal loan from Mom's kitchen renovation haunted me for weeks after I dealt with the other obligations. $20,000 that I'd borrowed in my name for her project with her promise to reimburse me. I'd been making payments for 2 years, and she'd contributed maybe $1,200 total. I'd paid over $9,000 of my own money into her kitchen. My attorney suggested I could sue for repayment, but the cost of litigation would eat up a significant portion of what I'd recover, and the emotional toll wasn't worth it. Instead, I made a calculated decision. I stopped making payments. My credit score took a hit. It dropped about 60 points over the course of 8 months as the missed payments stacked up. The account went delinquent, got charged off, and eventually sold to a collections agency. It hurt to watch, like seeing something I'd carefully built get deliberately damaged. But here's the thing, that loan was going to follow me for years either way. At least this way, I wasn't hemorrhaging $380 a month into a black hole. The collections agency contacted me about 6 months after I'd stopped paying. By that point, the remaining balance with fees and interest had ballooned to around $13,000. I negotiated a settlement for $5,000, paid it in one lump sum using part of the money from the house sale, and got the agreement in writing that the debt would be marked as settled and removed from my credit report within 90 days. The math worked in my favor. Finally, I'd paid about $9,000 over 2 years, plus $5,000 to settle, $14,000 total on a $20,000 loan that had never been mine to begin with. Mom got a $6,000 discount on her kitchen renovation, courtesy of my willingness to torch my credit score temporarily. Mom never said a word about the missed payments, which told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't been monitoring it, hadn't cared enough to check if I was still carrying her burden. The loan had stopped being real to her the moment she'd gotten the renovated kitchen she wanted. I kept the settlement letter in my filing cabinet, a reminder that sometimes you have to break something to fix it. Around the same time, Madison's social media presence became increasingly unhinged. She'd moved from complaining about me specifically to posting vague rants about toxic people and fake family members and narcissists who abandon you when you need them most. She discovered psychology terminology and was wielding it like a weapon, diagnosing everyone who had ever disagreed with her with various personality disorders. She posted a long Facebook note titled My Truth that detailed her version of events. In her story, I was a jealous, controlling older sister who'd always resented her for being prettier and more popular. The loans I co-signed were reframed as gifts I'd offered voluntarily and was now vindicatively taking back. The car I'd repossessed was described as something she'd been making payments on, which was fiction so bold it almost impressed me. The comment section was a mix of supportive friends who didn't know any better and a few brave souls who pointed out inconsistencies in her narrative. One former coworker of hers wrote, "But didn't you tell me your sister paid for everything and you were just borrowing the car?" Madison deleted the comment within minutes and blocked the person. I watched all of this from my locked-down profile, feeling a strange mix of pity and vindication. She was so desperate to be the victim that she'd constructed an elaborate alternate reality where nothing was her fault and everyone else was the problem. My therapist had warned me about this. People who've never been held accountable will do anything to avoid starting now. They'll rewrite history, recruit allies, create chaos. Don't engage with it, she'd said. Let her have her version of events, and you keep living in reality. So I did. I let Madison perform her victimhood for an audience of people who'd eventually get tired of the show. I focused on my actual life, the one I was building in the real world, with real consequences and real accomplishments. Mom and Dad downsized to a small rental across town. Madison moved with them. Naturally, I heard through the grapevine that they blamed me for their reduced circumstances at every opportunity, telling anyone who'd listen about their cruel daughter who destroyed the family. Some people believed them. A few acquaintances from high school unfriended me on social media. A couple of distant relatives sent me messages about the importance of forgiveness and honoring thy parents. But I also heard from people I didn't expect. My old roommate from college reached out after hearing some version of the story. When I told her the truth, she admitted she'd always thought my family treated me poorly, but hadn't felt like it was her place to say anything. A former coworker who'd moved out of state sent me a message saying her family had used her the same way and that cutting them off financially had been the best decision she'd ever made. Lauren, my lawyer friend, called me every couple of weeks just to check in and celebrate what she called my emancipation. I started therapy, not because I thought I'd done anything wrong, but because carrying that family dysfunction for almost 3 decades had left its marks, and I wanted to process it with someone trained to help. My therapist was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who validated my choices in the first session and spent the subsequent ones helping me work through the complicated grief of losing a family that had never really valued me anyway. "You're mourning the family you deserve to have," she told me during one session. "The parents who should have been proud of you and supported you. The sister who should have been your friend. It's okay to grieve that loss, even while you recognize that the reality never matched the ideal." 6 months after Dad's text message, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop on a Saturday morning, reading a book and enjoying a latte, when someone approached my table. "Charlotte." I looked up. It took me a second to place him, but then I remembered Tyler, Madison's ex-boyfriend from a few years back. He'd seemed like a decent guy, and I'd actually liked him during the brief time he'd been around, but Madison had dumped him for someone with a better car. "Tyler, hi. How are you?" "Good, good. Do you mind if I sit for a second?" I gestured to the empty chair across from me, curious. He sat down, looking a little uncomfortable. "I heard about what happened with your family." "Well, I heard Madison's version first, but then I ran into your old roommate, Amanda, at a party last month, and she told me the real story." Yeah, it's been a whole thing. Listen, I just wanted to say I'm sorry for what you went through. I dated Madison for almost a year, so I saw firsthand how your family treated you. You were always the one they called when something needed to be fixed or paid for, and I never heard them say thank you. Not once." He ran a hand through his hair, looking genuinely distressed. "Madison used to complain about you constantly, but all her complaints were basically just mad that you weren't doing even more for her. Like, she'd be upset that you couldn't loan her money for concert tickets because you had rent due, and she'd talk about how selfish you were. It drove me crazy. That's actually part of why we broke up. I couldn't deal with how entitled she was about everything. I didn't know what to say. I'd gotten so used to being the villain in my family story that having someone validate my experience felt almost foreign." "Thank you for telling me that. Honestly, it helps to know I'm not crazy." "You're not crazy. You're better off without them, in my opinion. Madison's still living with your parents, still working part-time, still posting dramatic stuff online about how everyone's wronged her. You're out here living your own life. You won." After he left, I sat there for a while thinking about what he'd said. I hadn't felt like a winner. I'd felt like someone who'd survived a disaster and was still picking up the pieces. But maybe that was another way of looking at the same thing. Maybe extracting yourself from a toxic situation and building something better wasn't about winning or losing. It was just about choosing yourself for once. I called the real estate agent I'd been talking to about buying my own place. With the equity from the house sale, the settlement savings from the personal loan, and my improved financial situation now that I wasn't carrying everyone else's debt, I actually qualified for a mortgage. A small one, she'd said, but enough for a starter condo in a neighborhood you like. "Let's do it," I told her. "I'm ready to start looking." A year after Dad's message, I closed on a 1-bedroom condo with a balcony overlooking a park. It wasn't huge, but it was mine. My name on the deed, my mortgage payment, my space to decorate however I wanted. I invited Amanda and Lauren over for a housewarming dinner. We ate takeout on my new couch and drank wine from mugs, because I hadn't unpacked my wine glasses yet. They toasted to my new beginning, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, especially around family gatherings: genuine happiness. "To Charlotte," Lauren said, raising her mug, "for having the courage to save herself." The family chat still existed somewhere in my blocked messages folder. I assumed they were still active in there, still complaining about me, still rewriting history to make themselves the victims. I didn't care enough to check. I'd started dating someone, a software engineer I'd met through a friend of a friend. Nothing serious yet, but he was kind and made me laugh and didn't expect me to solve his problems for him. We'd gone hiking the previous weekend, and he casually mentioned that his parents were excited to meet me eventually, that they'd heard so much about me. I'd almost cried in the middle of the trail. The idea of a family that was excited to know me, rather than excited to use me, felt revolutionary. Grandma Ruth came to visit during the holidays. She was the only family member who had my address, the only one I'd stayed in contact with. We had dinner at a nice restaurant downtown, and she gave me a check for $5,000 as a housewarming gift. "Your grandfather would be proud of you," she said, squeezing my hand across the table. "You've built a good life on your own terms. That's what matters." She told me about her updated will, completed a few months after our first phone call. She divided her estate so that Mom received a modest amount and I received the rest. "I explained my reasoning in a letter that will be read after I'm gone," she said. "She'll understand, or she won't. But either way, you'll be taken care of." I tried to argue that she didn't need to do that, but she waved me off with the same gentle firmness she'd used during our first call. "Charlotte, you're allowed to benefit from someone's love. You spent too many years giving without receiving. Let someone give to you for once." Sometimes I thought about reaching out to Mom or Dad, not to reconcile exactly, but to see if time had given them any perspective, if they'd realized how they treated me, if they felt any regret. But then I'd remember Dad's text message, "Stay away from us forever." Those words had been meant to hurt me, to punish me for some perceived slight I still didn't fully understand. Instead, they'd freed me. I'd stayed away. And in doing so, I discovered what my life could be without their constant weight dragging me down. I found out who I was when I wasn't constantly trying to earn love that should have been freely given. I learned that family was supposed to be a support system, not a financial burden masked as obligation. My coworkers became my chosen family. The friends who'd stuck by me through the drama became my inner circle. The life I built piece by piece became my foundation. And if my biological family wanted to paint me as the villain in their story, to tell anyone who would listen about the terrible daughter who abandoned them in their time of need, that was fine. I knew the truth. The people who mattered knew the truth. I'd removed my name from their loans. And in doing so, I'd removed their claim on my life. That was the real payback. Not revenge exactly, just the natural consequence of their own actions catching up with them. They'd sent me away and I'd gone, taking my good credit and stable income and willingness to be their safety net along with me. Sometimes the best response to stay away forever is to actually do it. And sometimes, the family you choose for yourself is better than the one you were born into. I was sitting on my balcony one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For a second, I tensed, wondering if someone from my family had gotten a new phone and was trying to reach me. But it was Amanda, texting from a new number, asking if I wanted to go to a concert next month. Nothing dramatic, nothing heavy, just a friend reaching out to make plans. I smiled and typed back a yes. Then I set my phone aside and went back to watching the sunset. Life was good. Not perfect, not without its challenges, but good. Mine. Finally, completely mine. And I knew, with absolute certainty, I would never, ever, sign anyone else's loan again, and I knew, with absolute certainty, I would never, ever, sign anyone else's loan again. That conviction settled deep in my bones, a kind of peace I hadn't felt in, well, forever. Life in my own condo started small, like a tender sapling finally finding solid ground to root. I meticulously unpacked, placing each item with a care that bordered on reverence. This wasn't just furniture or decor, it was the physical manifestation of my hard-won independence. My new couch, the one we drink wine on from mugs, became my favorite spot. It was here, curled up with a book, or just staring out at the park as the city lights twinkled on, that I truly felt at home, truly safe. Ben, the software engineer, was a revelation. Our initial dates were easy, filled with laughter and surprisingly deep conversations. He was observant, kind, and possessed a quiet strength that I found incredibly appealing. He never pushed, never made me feel obligated, and most importantly, he listened. Really listened. Early on, I remember him noticing my slight flinch when his phone buzzed, a habit ingrained from years of anticipating family drama. He asked about it, gently, and I found myself telling him a condensed version of my story, something I hadn't dared to do with anyone outside my closest circle. I watched his face as I spoke, bracing for judgment or worse, pity. But all I saw was understanding. "That sounds incredibly painful," he said, his voice soft. "And you handled it with immense courage." That simple validation meant the world. It wasn't just a compliment, it was a recognition of the emotional war I'd fought. He saw the scars, but he also saw the strength it took to survive. Our relationship deepened steadily. We spent weekends hiking, trying new restaurants, or just cooking dinner together in my little kitchen, laughing when we inevitably made a mess. He was everything my past relationships weren't: stable, respectful, and genuinely interested in me, not what I could do for him. His parents, it turned out, were just as lovely. When I finally met them, they greeted me with warmth and genuine curiosity, asking about my work and my hobbies, making me feel like an interesting person, not just a prospective daughter-in-law to be vetted. I remembered the surge of emotion on that hiking trail when Ben first mentioned them, the revolutionary idea of a family excited to know me rather than use me. Now, experiencing it firsthand, it was a balm to my long-aching soul. Work continued its upward trajectory. The promotion to senior account manager wasn't just a title change, it was a testament to my newfound focus and confidence. I excelled, no longer distracted by the constant hum of family crisis. My boss, true to her word, continued to champion me. I started taking on bigger projects, leading a team, and even presenting at industry conferences. My calendar, once a chaotic tangle of personal obligations disguised as favors, was now streamlined, dedicated to my career, my personal life, and my well-being. The extra energy my boss had mentioned? It was real. It was boundless. It was the energy of liberation. My chosen family became my rock. Amanda, my old roommate, became a fixture in my life again, our friendship rekindled with a fierce loyalty that warmed me. We went to that concert, and it felt like a celebration of our shared history and my brighter future. Lauren, my lawyer friend, remained my steadfast confidant, checking in, always ready with legal advice or just a sympathetic ear. She was incredibly proud of my journey, often reminding me of how far I'd come. "You're an inspiration, Charlotte," she'd say. "You really are." Even Patricia from my book club became a closer ally. Her son, it turned out, had moved out after the 60 days notice, though not without a dramatic, public Facebook rant about his cold-hearted mother that mirrored Madison's tactics almost perfectly. "He's still giving me the silent treatment," she confessed over coffee one afternoon, a bittersweet smile playing on her lips. "But my house is finally quiet. My finances are my own. And you know what? I'm actually dating again. Someone who appreciates a grown woman with her own life." We raised our cups, a silent toast to the quiet bravery of setting boundaries. The therapy continued, a vital space for processing the trauma I hadn't even fully recognized. My therapist, Dr. Eleanor Vance, was a gem. She helped me understand the cycles of enabling and manipulation, the subtle ways I'd been trained to seek approval through self-sacrifice. "Your family taught you that your worth was tied to your utility, Charlotte," she explained one session, leaning forward thoughtfully. "Now, you're learning that your worth is inherent. It's a completely different language of self-love." We delved into the grief, the mourning for the family I'd always longed for but never had. It was a strange kind of sadness, a loss not of what was, but of what never could be. But with each session, that grief became less raw, replaced by a quiet acceptance. Then, about 18 months after I'd seized back my car, a new chapter began to unfold with Grandma Ruth. She called one afternoon, her voice a little weaker than usual. "Charlotte, dear, I've had a bit of a fall. Nothing serious, just a sprained ankle, but the doctors want me in a rehabilitation facility for a few weeks." My heart squeezed. Without hesitation, I offered to fly out and help. "No need, darling, your mother and Madison are already making arrangements," she said, though her tone sounded resigned rather than pleased. "But if you could perhaps call me? It gets a bit lonely here." I called her every day. We talked about everything and nothing. I told her about my promotion, about Ben, about the progress on my condo, even about the silly antics of the local squirrels in the park outside my window. She, in turn, shared snippets of her youth, stories about my grandfather, and observations about life that were always laced with wisdom. It became clear, however, that her health was declining more rapidly than she let on. She began to sound confused sometimes, her memory fading. A few months later, I got the call from Mom. It was curt, businesslike. "Grandma Ruth passed away peacefully in her sleep last night." There was no emotion in her voice, just a delivery of facts. "The funeral is next Saturday. We'll send you the details." She hung up before I could respond. I cried, not just for the loss of my grandmother, but for the stark reminder of my estranged family's inability to connect on any genuine emotional level. Ben held me, silent and strong, letting me grieve. The funeral was a surreal experience. I arrived alone, Ben offering to come but me insisting I needed to face it on my own terms. The church was filled with distant relatives, some of whom acknowledged me with wary glances, others avoiding eye contact altogether. Mom, Dad, and Madison were a united front, looking impeccably solemn. Madison even managed to look tearful, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief while occasionally checking her phone. I sat in a back pew, a quiet observer, feeling like an anthropologist studying a strange, dysfunctional tribe. No one approached me. No one spoke to me. It was as if I were a ghost, present but invisible. After the service, there was a reception at a local hall. I had planned to slip away, but then I saw the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, a stern-faced man in a dark suit, gathering the immediate family. "For the reading of Mrs. Eleanor Ruth's will, please join me in the small lounge," he announced. Mom, Dad, and Madison exchanged confused glances, then headed in. I hesitated. Was I even invited? Then I remembered Grandma Ruth's words, "You deserve to benefit from family support, even if it comes after I'm gone." Taking a deep breath, I followed them. The small lounge was tense. Mom and Dad sat stiffly on a sofa, Madison perched awkwardly on an armchair. They didn't acknowledge me as I took the only remaining seat, a solitary wooden chair near the door. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "As per the last wishes of Eleanor Ruth, her will is to be read in its entirety to her direct descendants." He began, his voice dry and formal, going through the usual preamble, then detailing small bequests to various charities and distant cousins. Then he got to the main points. "To her daughter, Eleanor Jones, hereinafter referred to as Mom, I leave the sum of $50,000. Mom's eyes widened slightly. 50,000 was a good chunk of change, but probably less than she'd expected from her mother's comfortable estate. "To her granddaughter, Madison Jones, hereinafter referred to as Madison, I leave the sum of $10,000, with the stipulation that these funds be placed in a trust managed by my estate for a period of 5 years, after which they may be accessed, provided Madison demonstrates consistent employment or enrollment in a verifiable educational program." Madison gasped, a sound of outrage escaping her lips. "A trust? What is this?" she whispered furiously. Dad put a restraining hand on her arm. Then, Mr. Henderson looked directly at me. "And to my granddaughter, Charlotte Jones, hereinafter referred to as Charlotte, for her steadfast character, unwavering integrity, and the enduring love she has shown me, particularly in my final years, I leave the remainder of my estate, including my primary residence in Arizona, all liquid assets, and a portfolio of investments estimated to be approximately $2 million. The room went silent. You could literally hear a pin drop. Mom's face went white, then purple. Dad's jaw practically hit the floor. Madison let out a strangled cry. I felt a dizzying rush, a strange mix of shock and a profound, quiet sense of vindication. Grandma Ruth had truly done it. She had quietly and decisively acknowledged my worth, in a way my own parents never had. Mom finally found her voice a harsh, strangled whisper. 2 million? The remainder? What is this, some kind of joke? That's not fair. Mr. Henderson remained impassive. Mrs. Ruth had every right to distribute her assets as she saw fit, Mrs. Jones. The will is clear and legally executed. But Charlotte abandoned us. Mom shrieked, her composure crumbling. She forced us out of our house. She stole Madison's car. Mom, she's a vulture. Just like Dad said. Madison wailed, pointing at me with a trembling finger. I just sat there, completely calm. For the first time in my life, their accusations, their outrage, felt utterly hollow. It was noise, distant and meaningless. I looked at their faces, contorted with greed and resentment, and saw not pain or betrayal, but a raw, unmasked entitlement. It was exactly as Grandma Ruth had described, people who believed the world owed them something, without reciprocation. Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice steady, cutting through their rising clamor. I appreciate you fulfilling my grandmother's wishes. If there's nothing else for me here, I'll be in touch with your office to discuss the next steps. I rose from my chair, feeling a quiet dignity I hadn't known I possessed. I didn't gloat. I didn't even look back as I walked out of that room, leaving them to their stunned outrage. The fallout from the will reading was even more explosive than my initial boundary setting. The family group chat, which I deliberately kept silenced but not blocked, became an inferno. Messages piled up faster than I could scroll, filled with accusations, vitriol, and desperate pleas. Dad's lawyer sent another threatening letter, alleging undue influence on Grandma Ruth, which Mr. Henderson effortlessly batted away with a polite but firm letter outlining my consistent care for Grandma Ruth and her clear mental faculties when the will was drawn. Madison went on another social media rampage, painting me as a manipulative gold digger who preyed on an ailing elderly woman. This time, however, the response was different. My friends, Amanda, Lauren, and even Patricia, had become adept at quietly correcting the narrative amongst mutual acquaintances, or just outright calling out Madison's hypocrisy. My social media privacy settings were rock solid, and Ben helped me set up filters that kept the worst of the online abuse from reaching me. The inherited wealth was staggering, almost overwhelming. Mr. Henderson helped me navigate the complexities of probate and estate management. Grandma Ruth's home in Arizona was a beautiful, tranquil place, filled with memories and her meticulous records. I decided to sell it, but not before spending a week there, absorbing her presence, her wisdom, her quiet strength. I walked through her gardens, read her old letters, and felt her love envelop me like a warm blanket. The financial freedom was immense, a cushion that allowed me to breathe deeply, to dream bigger than I ever thought possible. I invested wisely, following the advice of financial planners Mr. Henderson recommended. I continued to work because I loved my job and the sense of accomplishment it gave me, but the pressure was gone. The constant low hum of financial anxiety that had been a background noise for decades finally silenced. I had the means to do whatever I wanted. I bought a larger home, still with a park view, but with an extra bedroom I converted into a bright, airy office and a guest room for friends. Ben moved in a few months later, making it feel even more like home. His presence was a quiet joy, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. My therapist pointed out a profound shift in me. You used to talk about finding yourself, Charlotte. Now you are yourself. You're not reacting to their drama. You're proactively building your own life on your own terms. It was true. The energy I once spent agonizing over family dynamics was now channeled into my work, my relationships, my passions. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the time or mental space for. I took painting classes, rediscovered my love for hiking long trails, and even planned a trip to Europe with Ben, something I never imagined I'd do for pleasure, rather than as a co-signer's obligation. The family, predictably, tried to re-engage, mostly through Mom. She called me, sometimes tearful, sometimes angry, demanding access to Grandma Ruth's will, asking for her share of the inheritance, or fabricating illnesses that required financial assistance. Each time, I listened with a detached politeness, thanked her for the call, and politely but firmly redirected her to Mr. Henderson for any financial inquiries. I learned to say no without guilt, to hold my boundaries without apology. She called me cold, heartless, and cruel. I simply responded, "Mom, I am simply respecting your wish for me to stay away forever. I took you at your word." The calls became less frequent, then stopped altogether. The silence was deafening, then it became peaceful. About 2 years after Grandma Ruth's passing, I received a certified letter from a distant cousin, a woman I barely knew but who had been a loyal friend to Grandma Ruth. It contained a small, leather-bound journal. "Grandma Ruth asked me to send this to you. After all is settled," the accompanying note read. "She said it was for you alone, when the time was right." I opened the journal that evening, curled up on my new couch, Ben reading beside me. It was Grandma Ruth's handwriting, delicate but firm. She wrote about her life, her joys, her regrets. And then, towards the end, she wrote about me. She spoke of watching me from a distance, recognizing the burden I carried, the inherent goodness I possessed that was so often exploited. She recounted her own struggles with my mother, her quiet sorrow at seeing history repeat itself with Madison. She explained, in her own words, why she had structured her will the way she did. "I could not save your mother from herself, Charlotte," she wrote, her elegant script filling the page. "But I could save you. I wanted to give you the ultimate freedom, the freedom to choose your own family, your own path, without the shackles of their need. You are a good daughter, a good woman. You deserve all the peace and prosperity the world has to offer, unburdened by those who would only take. Live your life, my dear. Live it fully and joyfully. That is my final wish for you." Tears streamed down my face, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of profound gratitude, of being seen, understood, and loved unconditionally. Ben gently took the journal from my hands, reading the final words himself. He just squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement of the deep impact of her words. The family I was born into might have written me out of their story, but Grandma Ruth had written me into hers, a story of love, resilience, and true inheritance. And in doing so, she had given me the tools to write my own. I had chosen myself, and in that choice, I had found not just freedom, but a deeper, more fulfilling connection with others. My life was no longer defined by the expectations or demands of others. It was defined by my own values, my own relationships, my own choices. The anger had faded, the grief had softened, and what remained was a quiet, unshakable contentment. I was sitting on my balcony one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Ben was inside, humming softly as he made dinner. My phone buzzed, a text from Amanda, asking if I wanted to double date with her and her new boyfriend next month. It was a simple, uncomplicated message, filled with the promise of shared laughter and genuine connection. I smiled, typed back a yes, and set my phone aside. The sky was a masterpiece, vibrant and ever-changing, just like my life. It was good. Not perfect, not without its challenges, but genuinely, wonderfully good. Mine. Finally, completely mine.